I'm Marc Rotterman. Joining me for this election 2020 conversation is Republican candidate for governor and current Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest. We contacted the Holly Grange and Roy Cooper campaigns as well. Mr. Forest, thanks for joining us. You know, Dan, I thought we'd begin with your early life before politics.
Boy, it's hard to remember life before politics, so to speak, in my family. As you well know, Mark, I grew up in a political family about junior high age, and my mom was in city council in Charlotte, and then she was the first female mayor of Charlotte, and then she served 2 terms there and went on to run for Congress and serve for 9 terms, 18 years up in Washington. So when I was growing up, a lot of those conversations that we had were about politics around the table, but that really wasn't my interest. My interest was sports as a young kid growing up. My dad was a sports announcer, and I loved all sports. So I played football, basketball, baseball, ran track, and my life really revolved around a ball or a track for all my high school years. And so I really never had a desire to jump into the political circles. And I went off to college and studied architecture at UNC Charlotte and got my architecture degree there, and loved being an architect for 21 years, worked for the state's largest architecture firm and was a partner there, and I loved every bit of it, and then felt called to step out of that. I left my career behind really at the height of my career. When everything was going great, I left it behind to serve the people of North Carolina because I love my state, and I really felt like some things were going in the wrong direction, and I wanted to step up and serve.
Well, in a nutshell, tell us why you're running for governor.
Well, I think that's it. I mean, I love North Carolina. It's my home. I think we live in the greatest state in America. We live in the greatest country in the world. That makes us a very unique place here in North Carolina, and I want to make sure that that is protected for my kids and my grandkids. We're growing at an exponential rate. We're seeing people move here from all over the world. We have lots of great things going for us, and we need to protect the things that make North Carolina great. We have to understand that it gets more difficult as a state gets larger, and I think I can bring my skills and talents and gifts, if you will, from the architecture world into government. That's as architects, you're visionaries and creative problem solvers and planners and consensus builders. These are things that I think are needed in government, and leadership's hard work. And I think I'm suited well for this task to help propel North Carolina into the future.
Let me ask you, you move around the state a lot. What are people talking about?
People talk about a little bit of everything. It's interesting that the number one topic today, I think, on the street is law and order. We have some sheriffs in our state now who are allowing violent criminals to go free back on the streets of their communities, and that's gotten people kind of up in arms. And I think you're just seeing a lot of conversation about gun regulation and red flag laws and Second Amendment ICE detainers. I mean, all these things are a big deal to people. I mean, safety and security is the number.
And talk about the sheriffs.
Well, I mean, first, safety and security is the number one job of government, to protect its people. It's kind of the top of the pyramid. So people aren't thinking too much about the economy or education and those other issues if their safety and security is on the line. So this ICE detainer thing, we have a handful of sheriffs in our big cities that are, I think, playing politics with the law and letting violent criminals, these are people that are rapists and people that are child molesters and sex offenders, and they're letting them go freely out on the street because they're not willing to pick up the telephone and make a phone call to the federal government and say, we have these people in our custody, would you like to come get them? That's how simple this really is. And so they're letting them go back out onto the street again, and the General Assembly passed a law to say, you need to cooperate with, and the sheriffs actually wrote this bill. So it was actually written by the other 95 sheriffs who said, we need to work with the federal government, just like law enforcement does.
That bill was vetoed?
And it was vetoed by the governor. And so people, I think, are going, hey, wait a minute. This is, again, primary function of government.
Let me talk to you. Of course, a very controversial and a thing that's been going on for a long time, and that's the budget impasse. Do we have any hope for a deal?
I don't think so right now. Doesn't really look that way. The budget has been broken down in some mini budgets, and some things were able to get passed through some separate mini budgets, but there's a lot of things left on the table here, and it kind of spans east to west. It's the best budget that I've ever seen. As Lieutenant Governor, I've been doing it for 7 years now, and by far the best budget. It kind of does the most things across the board for the state and for state employees and for teachers and all this sort of thing. So it's really kind of a shame. This was a place where Our governor drew a line in the sand on Medicaid expansion, when I really think he should have probably been sitting down with the General Assembly and talking about health care reform, comprehensive health care reform. Drew a line in the sand and said, I'm not going to pass this budget because of that one issue, and I think that's a failure of leadership.
Well, is Medicaid expansion sustainable? What is that funded by? What, about 90% of the federal government?
90% of the federal government. You never know when they're going to pull the rug out from under you and say that it's all yours at this point. Some people say, well, it's free money. It's free. There's no such thing as free money. Every dollar that the government has comes out of our pockets, and so we need to talk about comprehensive health care reform, transparency, making sure that everybody has really good health care, making sure it's low cost, that we're driving down the cost in healthcare for all families, right? And so make sure the poor are taken care of. We do that in America. We have a great safety net for people, and we want to make sure that we continue to protect that. But at the same time, all families, average families across North Carolina, hard working class families are struggling with healthcare now because the costs are driven up, and the Affordable Care Act was a disaster. So you sit there and you say, well, the government was completely in control of this disaster. Do we want to give the government something else to mess up in the world of healthcare?
Well, accessibility, affordability is important, but are Republicans in general delivering a good message on what they want to do on health care?
No, I don't think so at all. But I don't really think the Democrats are delivering a good message. It's just the same message. It's the Affordable Care Act all over again on a state level. I mean, we saw how that failed. So you can't just be against something all the time. You have to be for things. I think being for transparency in the healthcare system. We've seen this with Dale Folwell trying to say, hey, listen, our state treasurer saying,
right,
we need to drive down a healthcare cost for everybody. And the only way we can do that is to know what people are paying. So when you show up at the doctor, and the President Trump has been touting this too. There needs to be transparency when you show up to go get a procedure done at the doctor. You need to know up front what it's going to cost, no secret hidden costs down the road. And those kind of things drive up costs for everybody and make not only healthcare make it less affordable, but it's a less quality when that happens.
Currently we have I want to turn to the budget again. We have about an $896 billion surplus. Should that be rebated, do you think, to the taxpayers?
I mean, that's always an option. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we need to discuss in this state related to infrastructure, road infrastructure, and school infrastructure, and these kinds of things, water and sewer infrastructure. The state's been doing a pretty good job of that over the last 7 years of helping counties, sometimes in ways that they haven't done before. This past budget had school construction money in it. As you know, outside of what happens with the capital expenditure revenues from the lottery, that's left to the counties, and the state has stepped in here, and again, the budget got vetoed, but there was money in there for school construction. So at this point, I'd say no. We have surpluses, but that could happen, but I don't think it's necessary right now. We continue to cut taxes year over year, and so you're continuing to put more money in people's pockets.
Do we need a corporate tax rate cut again, do you think?
I think if it's feasible to do, I think you can do it. I think what we've seen is a moderated, reasonable approach to tax reform in North Carolina. No other state has done what we've done. We've driven down personal income tax, we've driven down corporate income tax, and we've actually seen the revenues for income tax increase for the state. So the state's getting more money in their pocket, and the people are getting more money in their pocket, and that's working. So I'm a fan of driving it down to zero as long as it's done in a reasonable way.
Can we have no income tax for individuals in a state like Florida?
Well, you can. Of course you can. I mean, it comes at cost in other ways, right? The government's going to get its money, so it's going to get its money from sales tax or service taxes, and that has lots of complications too. So I think you have to do it in a way that is as smart and reasonable and doesn't upset the apple cart. We got a great thing going in North Carolina right now. Let's stay on the path that we're doing. The General Assembly has set markers in place to say when these markers happen, we reduce the tax again. When this happens, we reduce the tax again. You don't want to go too far too fast and then have adverse consequences for it. So the economy's booming right now for a lot of reasons, but I think tax reform is one of them.
You don't favor tax incentives for corporations to come here, do you?
I'm not a big fan. I've always had a caveat to that. I've always said that if there's a game-changing market or industry that comes to our state, if we can attract a Boeing or a BMW into rural parts of our state where it's going to change the entire dynamic, not just the region, but the state, like BMW did in Greenville, Spartanburg. Amazon's a different story. Now, I mean, you're talking about Jeff Bezos, who is the richest man in the world and is worth billions and billions of dollars, but you're asking the people of North Carolina to give them billions of dollars to foot the bill for somebody that's got billions and could stroke the check in a half a second and not think twice about it. So no, I mean, I don't really think so. I don't think Amazon is the kind of player that you're talking about trying to attract here. But Apple, I think, is a good player. I think that as we've always talked about, the big manufacturers that are really going to help rural parts of our state, or the more suburban / rural parts of our state, grow. So where is the need? Our cities are doing great. They're going to continue to thrive. They're going to continue to grow. North Carolina's a great place. People are moving here from all over the world for a lot of reasons.
Right.
But I think we have to be reasonable about the transparency in the transactions that go on with things that I would call corporate welfare. Sometimes you're just writing a big check to a corporation that can afford to write their own check.
Well, healthcare is a big issue particularly for small business and for women's business owners, isn't it?
Healthcare? I mean,
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a huge issue for businesses right now. I mean, we saw it with the Affordable Care Act. All the businesses that said we can't play this game anymore. We can't afford to do this any longer. You and I both have friends that are, just working class Americans that lost their health care because they couldn't afford the $20,000 bill. They couldn't afford to keep their doctor. They couldn't afford to keep their plan if they liked it.
I was told that Obamacare really impacted women business owners. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know that. I really haven't looked at the statistics on that, but I wouldn't have any way of knowing that.
Well, they have to carry a lot, I guess, when they first start out. I mean, there has been talk of a recession. Do you see any signs of that currently?
No, I mean, I think you have the, folks on the left that want nothing more than a recession to happen while Donald Trump is president, and I don't see any signs of it in North Carolina. In fact, I talked to one of the heads of the Federal Reserve Bank just several months ago, and when the talk was really rampant, and I said, I'm hearing all this, but boy, I sure don't see it. Every business owner I talk to says it's the best year they've ever had, and he said, we don't see it anywhere on our radar. We don't see signs of a recession. So America can talk itself into recession. We've seen that happen, and it could happen again, but I don't see any signs right now.
I want to change gears a little bit and talk about school safety. What are we doing to ensure that our children are safe when they go to school?
Well, there's a lot of talk that keeps happening about it, right? I mean, a lot of things that are just a lot of chatter. There was actually money in this budget as well for school safety, and I want to say it was like $70 million in there. I'm not exactly positive, but there's a lot of chatter about it, but I think there's a simple solution to that, and we've seen it across the country, having armed resource officers / security folks in those schools to protect those students from the immediate threat. When you have armed security guards in the schools, it's rare that these things actually happen. It's actually shameful that we have to talk about this in this day and age, that we're worried about it. But you have to harden your schools, so to speak, make sure your doors are all locked and the security systems are up to date. As an architect, we worked on schools for many years ago before these shootings started happening, and there were always points of entry that you had to access the lobby, and you couldn't get past that point until you got through by security and these types of things. That's been going on for years. Every school should be at least
mental
that
health
hardened.
grants?
I'm sorry?
Mental health grants for folks to be on site?
Mental health is a massive issue in our country for a lot of reasons. I think we got to get to the heart of a lot of these issues, right? What we do is we put policy band-aids on a lot of things, but yes, we need to make sure that mental health is being dealt with in our schools. It's like teachers aren't just teachers anymore, and now teachers are psychologists, and teachers are disciplinarians, and teachers are everything else across the board, and you can't expect teachers just to be able to teach anymore if they have to do all these things. So you have to deal with the mental health crisis that we have in America, but I think what we need to do is really figure out what the heart is of these issues. What is causing these things to happen?
Is it a cultural problem?
I think it is a cultural problem. Yeah, I think you can look at the breakdown of the family in America. You can look at the breakdown of the church in America, where did we used to find our morals and our standard for living? You can look at fatherlessness across America. You want to talk about statistics for crime and men, especially in prison, you look at fatherlessness. Many of these men that are incarcerated right now come from fatherless homes. Let's start dealing with the things that are causing the problems rather than putting policy band-aids on top of policy band-aids and acting like these things are going to go away.
Dan, overall, how would you say our public schools are doing right now?
It's a mixed bag. It's kind of all over the place. It depends on where you are. If you're at a school that is generally a wealthier school in a wealthier neighborhood, and the parents are generally involved in that school, it can be a good school, and they're going to demand that there's a good principal and good leadership in that school and good teachers and so forth. And if you are on the heat map of the socioeconomically disadvantaged area, mostly poor minority areas, whether they're rural or urban, then it's not so good. And that's why I'm a fan of school choice, for that very reason, that we're not.
You did fight for broadband in all the schools too.
Yeah, I led the effort to get broadband in every classroom. We're the first state in the nation to have broadband in every single classroom in North Carolina. We worked with the federal government to do that. We have $100 million a year going to make that happen. And so trying to bridge really the education divide. So if you're in a poor urban or rural school right now, you have access to the same content and curriculum and teachers even that some students could get at places like the School of Science and Math in Durham, and we're even building a new School of Science and Math in Morganton, which also, because of the budget veto, that's on hold now and that's not moving forward. So I think bridging this education divide is really important. I think here's the key. To me, this is what I've witnessed anyway. Every school that has an excellent principal is generally an excellent school, or all excellent schools have excellent principals. Let me put it that way. They hire excellent teachers. Those teachers do their job. There's accountability in that school, and you see results. So I think we need to spend a lot of time focusing on having the best principals we can possibly have in all these schools, letting them attract the best teachers they can attract, seeing morale go up, seeing the teachers, letting the teachers do their job. Let teachers teach. Stop all this data collection and all this paperwork that teachers have to do and all the 100 other jobs that teachers need to do. Let them teach. They know how to do that, and you're going to see results.
Talk to us about opportunity scholarships. That's caused some controversy, some debate, correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very key differentiator between me and the governor right now, is he wants to eliminate school choice and especially eliminate opportunity scholarships. These are scholarships that are for the poorest students in the state of North Carolina. I don't know how you can stand against the poorest students not having the same opportunities that the governor's kids had to go to St. Mary's, or the president's kids had to go to the best private school in Washington, D.C. Why are you going to say the poor kids shouldn't have that opportunity? So it's just it's an opportunity for them, the parents, to choose a school that's really going to work best for their kids. And I've sat down with these opportunity scholarship parents, and we have a video online about it. But sitting there talking to them about the hope and opportunity that their kids had for the very first time, to see the demeanor and the attitudes change of their kids day one when they go to this new school, that is freeing to these parents and grandparents who are taking advantage of that. And that's really talking about true opportunity for kids that sometimes in these schools never have it.
Let's talk a little bit about higher education. How are community colleges performing?
It's a mixed bag as well, but our community college system is a good community college system. We have I think it's the best in the country. Our 58 community colleges stretch, as you know, into all of our communities across the state. Not everybody can afford to go to a big university, nor can they make the drive to Chapel Hill or NC State or UNC Charlotte or somewhere else. So the community colleges are a great bridge, but more importantly, I think what you're going to see is that as technology continues to change and these jobs continue to change, the community college system is going to be the avenue for training for these companies as they move to North Carolina. It is right now, and it's a great recruiting tool for us. But you're going to see, I think, the entire platform of the community college system start to shift into the future as these needs arise.
How would you rate our university systems?
Mixed bag again compared to the rest of the country. I think we have a good system. I think I think most people that I talk to out there, certainly on the conservative side, don't like the liberal leftist indoctrination of the 98% of the professors out there who claim to be liberal Democrats, or even socialists or communists or what have you. I think it's just it's kind of a shame that there's not more balance there. It's why we passed legislation for free speech on college campuses as well. We had a model legislation for the whole country, a free speech bill that we did a few years ago to say students just have the right to speak their mind and to have conversations about the things they believe in without being shut down by professors or embarrassed by professors or other students because they think in a different way. I mean, a university should be all about thought diversity. How do we have different opinions and how can we agree to disagree?
Well, we fought for that in the 60s. We wanted free debate.
Yeah,
we wanted,
that's right.
And on all college campuses.
Isn't that interesting?
It's changed. Let me talk to you about, I want to change topics.
Yeah.
We have a huge opioid crisis here.
Yeah.
How are we doing? And talk to us about the death by distribution bill.
Well, I think that we're doing pretty good compared to a lot of other states right now. There's a lot of people working on the opioid crisis, which is refreshing. It's a bipartisan issue. I don't see any
Attorney General Stein's working on it.
I don't see any real debate or argument from anybody that this needs to happen and we need to use all resources possible to make it happen. You're talking about a kind of a disease, if you will, that affects just average folks. It's just like moms and dads, especially on the prescription side. It used to be you had to go out on the street to buy your illegal drugs, and then the over-the-counter types of drugs or the prescription drug addictions became popular, and those people's moms and dads that were dying of overdoses. I was down east just yesterday talking to a sheriff, and he said they had over the weekend they had 4 overdoses. 4 overdoses. One was a father one day, and the next day it was his son. From opioids. So you have that, you have the heroin epidemic as well.
Which crosses all demographics.
Which crosses all demographics, and that's why I think everybody can come together and solve this. I think we really will solve this. There's always going to be a drug issue. I mean, we've had it for years, but you have to kind of get to the heart of the issue again of what's causing this. What causes, hopelessness in somebody's life to make them want to destroy their lives with drugs? Sometimes it's just, you start taking a pill, and sometimes it's you're trying to relieve pain and you get addicted to it. And so we're dealing with that part of it, the prescription side of it. But I think we're going to have a battle on our hands for a while.
Are we doing a better job, and I'm changing gears on you again, getting disaster relief to folks in eastern North Carolina?
Well, I'm hoping it's starting now. It's been almost 4 years, and South Carolina had built 1,000 homes before we had built one in North Carolina. So I think there are a lot of people that were left behind for a long time, and a lot of people are still struggling.
What can we do to fast track it?
Well, I think maybe some of that's starting to get worked out now. It was bureaucracy because we didn't have our paperwork filled out in North Carolina, and I think that the process that again the governor was using through Department of Public Safety with the emergency management folks was a flawed process, and I think they're starting to get that process fixed now, but it's cost a lot of people a lot of time. So listen, I look at it like problem solving, right? You put the map up, you say where are all the problems, you put people's actual names on that list, and you say how do we solve this? Sometimes it's going to be to rebuild their homes, sometimes it's going to be you got to move them out of that flood zone because you don't want to rebuild in a place that's going to flood again like that, and all those dynamics are going on, but it's hard work, right? You got to be dogged about it. You have to put a project team together, and you got to meet every week, and you say how are we doing, how are we tracking progress, and if there's no progress, fix it or change the team.
Some of those towns will never come back though, will they?
No, probably not. I mean, we have a lot of work to do related to flooding, and I think a lot of it's caused by development upstream. Our cities are growing, and a lot of impervious surface out there now that we didn't have. Water flows into streams. We haven't dredged our streams and rivers in North Carolina. Louisiana does a good job with that. I mean, we need to pay attention to some of the things that Louisiana's doing. But we've got to start paying attention to our rivers and streams and making sure that we're getting the silt and the muck out of those so that those depths of those rivers can take the water that's coming from upstream.
How are we doing on our transportation projects? Building roads, better roads for eastern North Carolina?
Well, 2 things. One, we just saw that the Secretary of Transportation, Department of Transportation, just retired, and I think there was some pretty massive mismanagement that happened there with money. They ran out of money. The General Assembly had to bail them out, even though there was a massive surplus there that the General Assembly put in place for a rainy day. They took $1 billion out of the highway fund and didn't ask permission or get sign off from the treasurer to do that. That's not supposed to happen. There's lots of these kind of things that are happening, and a lot of road projects are on hold now. A lot of contractors are out of work because of it, because of that mismanagement. This is going to be a big issue for a long time. I mean, we're going to have to be dealing with roads for a long time in North Carolina. We better get this right.
We're about out of time, but I want to ask you, what would the first 100 days of a forest administration look like?
The first 100 days is really, getting up and running. It's about crafting a vision. What's the vision going to be? Putting together a plan, putting together a team, and getting to work. It's project-based. What are the top projects at that moment? When we get into office, what are the top 5 most important things?
What would be your top 5?
Well, I mean, I think it's, one's going to be infrastructure. Certainly, you have to deal with infrastructure because it's going to be a burden. I think you have to deal with law and order. Law and order is absolutely critical to the state. We got to get law and order back under control. We got to make sure rule of law is being followed. Education's always a passion of mine. I want to make sure that we're a leader in education in this country across the board, that we're delivering competency-based education, that we are continuing to allow teachers to teach in the classroom, taking a lot of these burdens off of teachers and allowing them to teach. And then I would say it's innovation. I love innovation. I love the idea of some of the things that are going on out there right now. I talk a lot about transportation and intelligent transportation and things like flying transportation, which you're seeing all these manufacturers working on right now. We had a test flight here in North Carolina recently, and I think we can be a leader in aerospace and aviation in our state and intelligent transportation. So pick these projects that are related to market changers, right? What are the market makers and market changers that can put North Carolina on the map for the next 50 years? Who are we going to be? What do we want to become? And how do we put a plan together to get there?
Let me ask you this. Vocational education, is that be part of your platform?
Yeah, we've been pushing apprenticeships for a long time. And I think apprenticeship, the process has been a little bit backwards as it's been kind of dictated by the government. You know, when I started as lieutenant governor, we were charging companies $1,000 to be a part of our apprenticeship program. You know, we should be rewarding companies to be creating apprenticeships. They're giving them education, they're paying for education, and they're paying for their job. That should be a reward they get. And so I think it needs to be flipped around. I think the apprenticeship program needs to be led by the private sector, and the government needs to be support.
Lieutenant Governor Forrest, thanks for being with us. Remember, the primary is March 3rd. Thanks for watching, and have a great weekend.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.